So again, thanks for the invitation to come out here and to tell the Cincinnati story, if you will, and have a dialogue just about what we've done and any questions that folks have on that. And I'm just looking forward to the interaction with you all and what you're trying to accomplish here. I've got about 13 years of experience in the engineering field. I've got a water resources planning background, and started out doing watershed planning, and started developing watershed plans, stormwater management plans, developing green infrastructure plans, and also looking at utility management overall from an organizational and management standpoint. And so I've had the opportunity to work with the Metropolitan Sewer District for the past 2.5 years on their integrated watershed planning efforts. And this presentation is going to focus on just sort of the evolution of that. I'll talk a little bit about the history of the consent decree for the Metropolitan Sewer District and get a little bit into the last 3 years and what we've had the opportunity to do as part of that consent decree. And I guess if folks want to ask questions as we go along, is that okay, Jennifer? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here, if I can figure out how this puppy works.
Excuse me, you do need to project. You have to project so we can hear you.
Okay, so you need me to talk even more loud. Okay, all right.
Well, you have to stick it up your nose, but you know.
We wouldn't want to do that. Let me get this. Alright, well, I'll just move around. I've got the free mic going anyway. Okay, so what I'll talk about today is MSD's environmental challenge. I'll touch on our wet weather strategy and our approach to dealing with our consent decree and the Clean Water Act requirements. We'll talk about the opportunities that emerge to do some watershed planning as part of that consent decree. And then I'll talk about 2 case studies in particular, the Lick Run watershed and the West Fork watershed. And I'll talk through how we developed alternative strategies in those watersheds that allowed us to do something a little bit different than what we call typical gray solutions. And then I'll touch a little bit on some next steps for us and what we plan to do moving forward. So a little bit about Cincinnati, particularly the Metropolitan Sewer District. We're a publicly owned utility. We're actually owned by Hamilton County and operated by the city of Cincinnati. So our director has basically 2 bosses. So it's an interesting arrangement that we have there, and all 3 entities, of course, are plaintiffs in the consent decree. So we have to work together to accomplish the requirements of that consent decree. Predominantly in Hamilton County, we are in some other counties, Butler County, for example. We serve about a population of about 850,000. We operate about 7 wastewater treatment plants, which treat about 70 billion gallons per year. When we entered into our consent decree officially, our final wet weather improvement plan was approved in 2011 actually, but we submitted it in 2009. And at that time we had an opportunity to brand the program in a way that spoke to how we wanted to leverage the consent decree. Specifically, we were going to spend billions of dollars over a few decades. And so we wanted the opportunity to let the community know that we had a chance to leverage that public infrastructure to do something a little bit differently in the communities that we serve. And I'll get into why the district went in this direction in a minute and talk a little bit about some factor conditions in our communities at the time of the consent decree. So basically, Project Groundwork focuses on obviously protecting the environment, meeting the Clean Water Act requirements, but also partnering with our communities and working with our neighborhood community councils and other entities, public agency entities, to develop solutions that meet multiple objectives, that derive multiple benefits, if you will. We wanted to revitalize the economy, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of how things looked back in 2009 for us, and then an opportunity to design innovative solutions again, we had an opportunity to be creative in how we met the requirements of our Clean Water Act, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So a little history of the consent decree. This effort started in about 2002, and the focus was predominantly on sanitary sewer overflows. It wasn't until a year and a half later that the focus on combined sewer overflows came into play, and the US EPA put a requirement on us to control combined sewer overflows as well as eliminate sanitary sewer overflows. We submitted an initial wet weather improvement plan, what we call our WIP, in 2006, and we made some revisions to that plan based on some additional analysis and modeling of the system that we did at the time. By the time 2009 rolled around, and we're getting ready to submit a revised plan, there was a lot of talk about, in between that time, of is there an opportunity to do green infrastructure as part of our plan. And so the MSD partnered with Hamilton County to develop a green infrastructure study. And basically the point of that study was to look at how much green would it take to meet a large portion of the objectives for the consent decree. And I'll get into what those volumes are in a minute here. When that plan was put together, it was it looked a lot like I guess the Philadelphia plan, in terms of a lot of decentralized near source controls, such as rain gardens, green roofs, those types of technologies. And when we submitted this to the US EPA, they rejected it. And the reason that they did reject it was because they felt that while the technologies would meet the stormwater management controls and in turn control combined sewer overflows, they felt that the assurance, and that was the big thing that we kept hearing over and over again, even up until recently, as we developed our alternative strategy, was the assurance of long-term control of those green infrastructure assets. And so can you show that for the long term you have some kind of control or ownership of those assets to ensure they perform for the long term and continue to deliver the performance they need to in order to maintain compliance with the consent decree. So that was the feedback that we got in 2007 after we submitted that plan. And so we retooled, we went back to the drawing board and decided that we wanted to keep pursuing the essence of green infrastructure, which is source control. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, managing stormwater at the source and basically preventing it or controlling it so it doesn't get into our combined sewer systems. And we feel that that was a more cost-effective way to look at our consent decree. And so we retooled and we developed more of a large-scale strategy that we called sustainable infrastructure. And what we wanted to convey was that there's a partnership between what we call typical gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. There's a place for both, but that sometimes the green can lead the gray. That the green can right-size, if you will, the gray. And so that's where we wanted to go. We wanted to leverage the public infrastructure dollars that we were going to have to invest so that we were meeting the requirements of the consent decree in the best manner, but also finding a way to maintain the integrity of our system by pulling out that storm water, but also thinking about what we were leaving behind as a result of that investment. So that's a direction that we went in, more of a sustainable infrastructure strategy. So we went ahead and submitted that plan in 2009, and as part of that plan, we were able to, we got the head nod from USEP on this approach, and we were able to include two things in our 2009 plan. One was the opportunity to do a 3-year study on the very concept of sustainable infrastructure strategies, and to look at more large-scale integrated solutions that leverage both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. So that was one. And then the second thing was the opportunity to do what we called a green demonstration program. And that was a 5-year program that actually had started before 2009, based on some foresight by the district leadership in the county, to start looking at installing projects that allowed us to learn a little bit more about different green infrastructure technologies. So bioinfiltration basins, rain gardens, bioswales, those types of things that allowed us to really look at, in our environment, the Cincinnati environment, what really works and what can we encourage the district to use and what can we encourage public property owners to use as well. So there was a great opportunity to actually partner with entities like Cincinnati State, for example, the Cincinnati Zoo, to install projects on their properties. What the program did was basically pay the differential for them installing a more innovative stormwater management practice on their property as opposed to putting in a storage tank, for example. So those are the key aspects of the history of the consent decree. The other thing that was really key as well in allowing us to negotiate an opportunity to look at green infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure in our consent decree was revisions to the Ohio Revised Code, 6117. The Hamilton County, the city, MSD worked together to, and others, to petition changes in that code, which basically defines what a sewer district can and cannot do in essence. But specifically, what the change allowed us to do was to leverage public dollars to manage stormwater as part of the sewer district. So that provision was not there or clearly there before. And so that allowed us to look at stormwater management practices as part of our combined sewer overflow program. Okay, so a little history about one of the watersheds in our area, the Lower Mill Creek watershed. And this is where the focus of the first phase of our wet weather improvement plan, or our consent decree, is. And basically what we wanted to do was take a look at historically what the drainage system in this area looked like today, what it looks like, to give us an understanding of how much that system has changed in terms of preparing ourselves to manage stormwater. And so historically, we had natural streams in this area, about 303 miles of that, and so we had less runoff, if you will, to the Ohio River. We had opportunity to infiltrate more, evapotranspirate more, and to really take advantage of the natural hydrologic cycle, if you will. Now, as we started to develop, there was a need, obviously, to put in infrastructure. And it was easiest to use basically the alignment of these historical streams to put in this infrastructure. And so, like with many communities, we've got buried streams now, in essence. And so we've got 75 miles of existing streams left in this watershed, and over 600 miles of combined sewers. So this just kind of depicts a couple of the watersheds that I will talk about. Lick Run in particular, just sort of depict some of the wet weather, what we call the wet weather issues in this watershed. We've got, as you can see, flooding. The picture on the top right there is CSO number 5, which is one of our larger dischargers, largest CSO dischargers in the MSD service area. Now, again, our focus was on what we call the Lower Mill Creek area, which is more or less that purple shaded area. We looked at some other areas outside of that, but for the most part, that was our focus. And what we had the opportunity to do, again, was to take a watershed view of these areas and determine where the source of both water quantity, i.e. stormwater, was coming from, and then water quality issues was coming from as well. Because at the end of the day, a Clean Water Act is about water quality. And so we want to be able to manage quantity as well as quality in order to manage overall receiving water quality. So this is our challenge here. In a typical year, our system discharges about 14 billion gallons of combined sewer overflow into the Ohio River. We've got about a little over 200 combined sewer overflows and about 78 sanitary sewer overflows. Our consent decree requires us to eliminate those sanitary sewer overflows and to achieve various levels of control for our combined sewer overflows. Typically, you don't control those to 100%. But phase one of our program focuses on eliminating 2 billion gallons of combined sewer overflow. So that was the first phase of our work, to eliminate 2 billion gallons of that 14 billion gallons. And as I mentioned, the 2009 that was put in provided us an opportunity to initiate a 3-year study to look at an alternative way of meeting that 2 billion gallon reduction goal. What was submitted as part of the 2009 plan is what we call a default remedy. So it's a Lower Mill Creek default remedy, partial default remedy. And that included a deep tunnel, as well as some consolidation sewers, as well as sort of an on-site treatment facility, what we call an enhanced high-rate treatment facility. And that was the plan that was submitted as our default, if you will. So per our agreement, that was regulatory-wise what we had to meet. But we also had an opportunity at the same time to look at doing something different from that, because we felt all that infrastructure would be completely buried. And is there an opportunity at all for us to look at this a little bit differently and spend our money a little bit differently and control our water quality problem a little bit differently as well? So we felt our wet weather improvement strategy presented a phased approach because we could focus on phase one, see how that performed, and inform phase two, which is actually what we're getting ready to work on now, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. It allows us to control our spending, of course, by having a specific target and specific opportunities. And then again, it's an integrated strategy that leads with source control that allows us to then appropriately use other gray infrastructure technologies such as storage and treatment. So just a couple of quick highlights. So as I mentioned, in 2009 we had the opportunity to start a study that looked at an alternative remedy to the default solution. At the, I guess it was the middle of December, we were able to submit the findings of that study. And it's called a Lower Mill Creek Partial Remedy Study. And actually the report is available on our website, projectgroundwork.org, if you want to take a look at that. But that work was, again, a 3-year study. It was a result of continuous public input into the process. We created key partnerships with some of the key communities that were going to be impacted. What the final report study submitted was that we could indeed, with what we called a sustainable infrastructure approach, not have to pursue a deep tunnel. And so our strategy focuses, it's founded on source control and doing strategic storm separation, as well as installing green infrastructure throughout key watersheds in the Lower Mill Creek watershed, and I'll touch on that here in a minute. And so that's what we've submitted to the regulators. We submitted at the middle of December. They've officially opened up their public comment period, and so that's ongoing now for the next few days. And then we'll proceed accordingly to what they decide and what they instruct us to do. We worked also very closely with USEPA through this whole thing. We met regularly with them since 2009, and in 2012, as we're starting to pull the report together, pull the findings together, we met monthly with them, and even more recently, weekly. And so our collaboration with USEPA was very, very important in being able to pull this package together and ensure that we're meeting their concerns about an alternative remedy.
So Mike,
Uh-huh.
can you say something now?
Sure.
I'm just kind of curious, is this group, our group here, have we gone to that step that you just noted? Have we as a group talked to the U.S. Department of, or are we relying on our local sewer authority, which is Alcosan, to do that for us? Because if we're relying on Alcosan, us as a group rely on Alcosan to do that for us, I think we better think twice about our strategy. We're relying on them to bring us to this solution. have we gone that far? Has the watershed, has the 9 Mile Creek group gone that far to make arrangements to speak with the USG?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Thank you. All right, that's my question. Does anybody have an answer in regards to that?
We can do that during Q&A. If you have more questions related to what's going on
I just had to
locally,
get that one out.
we'll have someone on our panel up right at the end to answer some of the local questions about what our campaign is doing and what process we're in here in this part.
But we're not that far yet.
No.
Okay.
It's a good question, though. It's a good question.
I have a question.
Sure, yes.
Could you expand on what the strategic storm separation is?
Sure. Actually, the slides that are coming up will highlight that. Yes, I'll absolutely talk through that and what that entails. This is just kind of a snapshot, if you will, of the default solution through here. Let me keep track of my time. Basically, it involved a deep tunnel, some treatment facilities, some larger connector sewers.
What was the cost and who did it with you? What was the cost?
Of the default solution?
Yes, the cost and you were together with the community and the city, or?
Well, yes, when we put together the 2009 plan, which was what we needed to be held to until the time that we could complete our study and show a different way. The cost of the default solution was $244 million in 2006 dollars. And that was just for, okay, and that was just for the Lower Mill Creek partial remedy. There's other projects that are happening throughout the Hamilton County area.
Was that your final solution to the overflooding?
That is not. So
Okay.
this is our default solution. We just submitted a study for an alternative remedy to that,
Okay.
which is based in source control
I thought it was.
and eliminates the tunnel.
Oh, good.
In reference to that question that was expanded, who was flipping the bill for this? Was there some federal money there for you guys?
For our consent decree,
Yeah.
it's ratepayer based.
Rate
Ratepayer.
or repair?
Yeah.
So what I mean is, do you know how the funding was established on that? I mean, was there funding that was funneled through the feds, through the state, or the county, or the city?
Or nonprofit?
Well, so there's two things. With a alternative approach, if you deviate from doing simply gray infrastructure and traditional infrastructure, and you start to do things that speak to community livability principles and that sort of thing, then you can leverage other funding. Okay, so what we were able to do was that we were able to leverage a community challenge grant and some other funding, some Clean Ohio funding as well, as it related to stormwater management practices, as it related to brownfields remediation that we were doing as part of our projects. So if you start to do things that are a little bit different, it opens up your opportunities for different funding, outside of the, state revolving fund and that sort of thing. You can start to do different things. So that's a good question.
Well, you guys
Yeah.
went to a pretty good pace here compared to the fact that we are an older city than you guys are. So it's kind of interesting to make those kind of comparisons. Thank you.
Yes.
I have two questions.
Uh-huh.
Did you have to modify the consent decree to change the focus of your plans?
Yes. Yeah. So the study that we've submitted is our proposed change to the consent decree.
And EPA has accepted that?
They have not accepted it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the people who are proposing the changes, though, are signatories to the original consent decree?
Correct. So it'd be the city, the county, and MSD. Yep.
Okay, it's three.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You mentioned a couple of parties there. Is this only within Hamilton County? Is Hamilton County and Cincinnati one and the same? Are there other communities? What does the political landscape look like in the area that's affected by it?
Well, most of MSD's service area is within Hamilton County. And so I mentioned earlier that Hamilton County actually owns the district, so the assets associated with the district, whereas the city of Cincinnati, which is the largest member within MSD, actually operates it. So they get the operating budget from the county. So it's very political. Yeah, if that answers your question. Yes. Oh my goodness. Oh, you got me good. Someone else asked me that question too. And I can't remember the exact number, but it's not quite 83. But it's a lot of jurisdictions as well. Yeah.
Do they have to sign off on the source control?
Well, in essence, through the public input process, yes. Yeah. That's sort of our vehicle to get feedback on the plans that we're trying to pursue. Okay, I've got a few more slides, and then I guess we'll do some more questions. Okay, so again, the focus was on Lower Mill Creek. That basin actually contributes 7.6 billion gallons. So again, we're as well. And conveyance and storage is big pipes, underground basins, storage basins, and product control is just our fancy way of saying treatment. So nothing fancy there. So as we entered into the discussion with US EPA on how do we conduct the study and what do you want to see as the outcomes of that study, they gave us some guidelines. And they provided us with basically 6 or 7 items that they wanted to ensure we demonstrated as a part of our alternative study. And the main thing that was a part of that was showing that we could produce an equivalent level of control. That was number 1, for the same cost or less. Those were the basic criteria. As I mentioned earlier, there was also concern about the control, if you will, of decentralized green infrastructure assets. So the rain gardens, the bioretention cells, those types of infrastructure. They wanted to ensure that we had a plan that ensured we could continue to control the performance and maintenance of those assets. So as part of our alternative study, we had to develop an operations and maintenance plan to demonstrate our long-term guarantee, if you will, of the asset performance. Okay, and then I think someone mentioned this earlier, but as part of this planning process, this 3-year planning process, we had the opportunity, of course, to figure out a stepwise approach to evaluating an alternative strategy, and that's how we developed our integrated planning framework, if you will. We call it our Sustainable Watershed Evaluation Planning Process, which is a mouthful, aka our SWEP. But it's our way of evaluating opportunities and constraints to source control, in essence, source control. We feel that if we lead with that, if we control stormwater, then we can control the cost of other infrastructure that we need to install for an overall competitive solution, cost-competitive solution to source control. And so as we developed that, US EPA was also developing their integrated planning framework, which allowed communities to be a bit more flexible in how they met permit requirements or consent decree requirements. So it's a great opportunity, again, to partner with US EPA on how we develop that approach. So the district was in a great position to make some changes, if you will, in the way that they developed projects and in the way that they fulfill their consent decree. And they felt that, you know, here's a chance for us to make a sewer project more than just a sewer project. We're going to be investing billions of dollars for the next, you know, several decades in order to deal with our water quality issues. And we want to ensure that the communities that we're impacting, we're leaving them in a much better position and a much better footing so that they can fulfill their community visions respectively. And so again, it was an opportunity for us to do some outreach and to speak about communities in the future, which is a way for us to really understand the conditions of our communities, to leverage the dollars that we have to spend anyway, and again, to tie in with the vision of these communities. A lot of this was also supported at the city level, the mayor and the city council level, and so it was just really, you know, just kind of when things come together at the appropriate time was a really good time for us to think about public infrastructure spending in a different way. What we formed as part of this was our Communities of the Future Advisory Committee. And this included several regional partners within Hamilton County, both public entities, neighborhood associations, nonprofit associations, that helped us to understand those neighborhood and community conditions and help us shape our solutions. and understand the visions of those communities. We actually broke up this group into a couple of working committees. We met initially every quarter or so to get together, and we found that we're kind of migrating around 3 areas of interest, what we call inform and influence, where we're talking about sort of the public education piece and the public partnership piece. Policy, where do we need to make some changes to our current policies? Where do we need to influence future policy? And then economic development. Again, how do we leverage these dollars to do something that ties in with what community and economic development are doing, for example, what master planning activities neighborhoods are doing? Where can we leverage? That was just the message throughout. It was just a once in a lifetime opportunity for most folks to make this happen. So working together, we looked at integrated planning. We had to bring in transportation. We had to bring in sort of environmental conditions. We had to bring in urban conditions. We did urban audits in some of these areas. So really understanding the current conditions and how we can leverage all the activity, all the spending, not only on MSD's part, but also for other public entities as well. As part of developing our integrated planning framework, if you will, what we call our SWEP, we found that we could identify different types of projects as we did that. Our direct projects were the ones that were going to be part of our consent decree, were opportunities for us to do something different than the identified gray solutions, and that MSD would basically pay for. We also, though, found that we could look at opportunities to, again, influence communities or influence other partners. And so we identified enabled impact projects as well as inform and influence projects. In our enabled impact projects, I talked a little bit about our green demonstration program. It was a 5-year program that we actually recently wrapped up, and it's going to change a little bit, but the essence of that program was if you went ahead and put in a more sustainable stormwater management practice on your property, we would pay the differential of that cost. It would either be the planning, the engineering or design, or the construction. And so that was our opportunity to partner with folks and change behaviors. And we're able to work with very visible partners, such as Cincinnati Zoo, as I mentioned, and Cincinnati State. We also did some work near downtown in an area called Washington Park, which is in the Rhine area, which is going through its own sort of redevelopment, reinvigoration, if you will. And so that's an opportunity for us to leverage our money to help others install better practices for stormwater management. And then the third is inform and influence. And this is working with organizations like community development, with Cincinnati Recreation Commission, to again change attitudes around stormwater management and have folks look at whether it's downspout disconnects, putting in rain gardens, something that's a little bit more personal and more near sight, but changes the perception of stormwater management and changes the perception of how they can impact character of a community as well. So just a couple examples of enabled impact projects. This is a Cincinnati State project I mentioned before. One of the projects they actually put in was they call it a rain garden, but it's a large detention area through here. It's actually a dual cell. What that means is this is the top cell, the top detention area, and then there's a lower one. So it's sort of a in series, detention in series through this area. They also put in some pavers as well in their parking areas. There's another partner. We actually partnered very closely with Cincinnati Public Schools as well. They were actually going through just sort of a renovation project for a lot of their schools at the time. Again, time and opportunity kind of matches, if you will. So it was a great opportunity to work with them. They put in some pavers, some curb cuts in some of the repaved parking areas that they had. This is Cincinnati Zoo, and they put in some pavers here and some detention areas, bioinfiltration areas through here. And then we worked with actually a shopping mart that was getting ready to demolish its facilities, and they were just going to leave a plain parking lot in its place. So we actually worked with them and the Cincinnati Recreation Commission which owned a portion of that property, to go ahead and put in some innovative storage through there. So that's actually during construction, so it's not as pretty as when it was finished. And this is actually some reforestation that we did. Something as simple as that. We worked with the Cincinnati Park Board to do this project. And we went ahead and planted a number of young trees through this area. And it was just a great example of something that's simple and targeted to go ahead and control stormwater management. And then lastly, we worked with a church in the Lick Run watershed, and I'll talk about that watershed a little bit more. But they were getting ready to repave their parking lot, and we approached them about doing something a little bit different. They were all game for it. Again, we leveraged our funds to pay for that differential, and they put in some pavers through there. They put in a small rain garden as well with some curb cuts, and it's actually really beautiful. The church members love it, and they're doing a great job of maintaining it. That's the other thing.
Just to make sure I'm understanding
Sure.
correctly.
Uh-huh.
You've done a variety of community-based projects that the municipal sewer authority has paid for even before your consent decree has been passed, and they're all green infrastructure projects.
Well, our consent decree was passed, and I guess that's what I want to make sure everybody understands.
So it's a little, okay, so you can clarify that. Because
Sure.
I thought I heard you say you had to resubmit your plan.
Yeah, we had an opportunity when we submitted our 2009 plan, which we called our final revised plan, and that was not officially accepted until 2011, as I mentioned. And so what we did as part of that 2009 submittal was two things. One was to say we wanted to initiate a 3-year study that allowed us to look at an alternative to what was in that plan. Yes, to right size, you got it. And then the other was, hey, can we do some demonstration projects to start learning ourselves and start demonstrating to you, EPA, that these things work. So that's what this represents, our 5-year green demonstration program, if you will. That's a good question. I know it gets a little confusing. Yep.
What's the differential that you refer to? Is it what it would cost not to do it green versus what it would cost to do it green?
Correct.
And that's what you pay.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. And there's, some judgment call in there. You could argue that it's comparative, but there's a learning curve. And the other thing about this is these allow the design and construction community to learn about how to build these things. We learned a lot building these things, and the contractors learned a whole lot building these things. So now when we're trying to do more larger scale versions of these, we have better specs, we have better guidance, so they're installed correctly and inspected and maintained correctly.
Did you monitor the performance, flow performance?
We did, and I know I keep saying this, but we actually were with USEP on that too. Their research and development lab is in Cincinnati. And so we partnered with them actually on another area I'll show you, and the Cincinnati State area as well, specifically. They installed meters through the area to measure both quality and flow through there. On another site, they actually installed evapo pans, so they could measure sort of the rain and the evaporation associated with that. In another area, they actually installed probes, so they could measure the groundwater influence. So it was a very good opportunity to partner with them and kind of work to understand how these things work and influence the whole cycle of water.
Did the communities have a choice on the projects that you brought into their communities?
For these
Input.
For these enabled impact projects,
Yes.
you mean? Well, these were led by the property owner. So if the property owner was making those changes, then they approached MSD and said, hey, we want to apply for one of your grants so that we
But
can
it wasn't the
install
community.
this.
It was a property owner.
It was a property owner. So like the San Antonio Church, for example, or Cincinnati State, for example. Yeah.
State and church.
Yes.
Now, in reference to the so-called research, how do you prevent, let's say, if you have a major storm or whatever, what the capacity of your various, I call it, gray spots are holding or are capable? Or do you shut it off some special way, or so you one flood the area, or it just keeps on going, or how do you handle that?
That's a good question, and I mean, these were designed according to City of Cincinnati stormwater management guidelines, and so there had to be sort of an overflow capacity for larger storms. When we're talking about managing combined sewer overflows, we're talking about the typical year event, which is, you know, people say somewhere between a 1 and a 2 year, but we're talking about typical year event. But these facilities have to be designed for more than that, depending on what your local stormwater regulations require. And for Cincinnati, we've got to show that we can control the 10-year and the 25-year event as well. So it'd be overflow capacity associated with these to prove that.
So y'all went by the seasons of the year, right, on the project?
I'm sorry?
Every season of the year has a different impact on the water.
Correct, absolutely.
You went by the system.
Absolutely. Right, and it would depend on what you put in. If you put in, for example, engineered wetland, for example, then you have to pick your plants in a certain way that accounts for the variation in the seasons. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea what the cost of the EPA work is to monitor the effectiveness of this green infrastructure?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't have that off the top of my head, but that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I have to research that one. Uh-huh.
One of the things you mentioned before was EPA's requirement that you demonstrate that you have control over these projects. In most of the cases, if you've cited so far as a demonstration, they've been on public land or some kind of public. Here's a case where the church is not. What kind of consent or agreement did you have to get from them that if they decided in the end they didn't like that and they just paved over it, that they wouldn't be able to do that? How does that work?
Excellent question. So, because MSD's money is in these, we have a maintenance agreement with each of these projects. And so we provide them, we help them with setting up what the maintenance requirements need to be for these assets. And then we also work with them if they happen to do monitoring and all that stuff on their property, like EPA is doing with Cincinnati State, then we ask for that data as well. So those are two conditions, if you will, that we have on the funding.
Is that legally binding, similar to like a land easement, where the property is protected?
You know, it's a good question. We haven't gone as far as a land easement, and we have been talking about how to do that. Now, the other side of it is that these enabled impact projects are not our consent decree projects. So, you know, so these provide us sort of with what we call additional benefit. Let's put it that way. And so we don't regulate these as much as we typically would. That's a great question. We haven't gone that way yet, but we've looked at it for a couple of the projects that we do have, looking at doing conservation easement, for example.
What are the monthly fees that residents and commercial property owners pay for stormwater treatment, and do they get any incentives for installing green
You know, that's a
infrastructure?
good question. I don't.
We couldn't hear that question. What was it?
The question was, what rates or fees do residents pay for stormwater, and are there any incentive programs? I don't know the rates off the top of my head, but they're not very high. I could tell you that for sure. You know, sort of the cost of stormwater management and what it truly costs to manage stormwater is a bit out of whack. But the City of Cincinnati stormwater utility does not yet have an incentive program. So that's a great question. That's a great question. Okay, yes.
Have you encountered any situations where these proposals are contrary to zoning or land use controls of the municipality that couldn't go in for that reason?
You know, we have not run into that situation. That's actually an excellent question. We haven't run into that situation.
A simple question. Basically, you are representing the Cincinnati equivalent of Alcosan of sorts, right? I mean, yeah, okay. Why are you doing this? What was the incentive? I mean, seriously, we represent a bunch of kind of activist groups that are trying to beat Alcosan over the head to do some of the things that you're doing. So, pardon?
Can we clone them?
Yeah, I mean, what was the incentive to get you started in this direction?
Well, you know, it was obviously the cost of the consent decree. You know, that was one. Is there a way that we can do this better? And second, and I'll roll through those slides here in a minute, was just sort of the economic condition of our communities at the time that this consent decree was in place. We were dealing with high foreclosure rates, we were dealing with people leaving the service area, fleeing to the suburbs, if you will. And so we had to think differently. We had to do things differently and use our dollars in a different way that helped to rebuild our communities and therefore rebuild our ratepayer base at the end of the day. That's really what it comes down to.
I would say that you're enlightened engineers that we do not have here in the southwestern Pennsylvania.
Here.
Some folks were referring to. No, I said, yes, but they do not have the southwest. You know, I'm a landscape architect, and you know what I think about it.
All right, I'll take two more questions.
So I think you said this earlier, but I just wanted to get it clear. The MSD owns the collection system all the way up into the neighborhoods, the catch basins, the pipes, the house, well, I guess not the house laterals, but all the connections through the streets is all owned by MSD?
The county, yeah,
The
Hamilton
county,
County.
which is very different than what we have here in Alcoasand,
Exactly.
right?
That's
Because Alcoasand does not own any of the catch basins,
That's right.
none of the pipes,
That's right.
none of the gutters, they
That's
don't do
right.
any street cleaning, they don't own any of that. It's all municipalities.
That's right.
And so the jurisdiction, I'm not a likely person to be defending Alcoasand, but the Alcoasand simply doesn't have the jurisdiction to do what MSD has done in the watershed.
That's right. You have privately owned districts.
And you make a good point. I mean, I did talk about the fact that there are different jurisdictions, neighborhoods, communities, whatnot within the sewer district, and you know, most of them defer to Hamilton County / MSD for their service areas. But there are a couple of communities that do their own, mostly stormwater, not sewer. But you're right. For the most part, yes, you're right.
Alcoasand
MSD
has a
does.
mandate to receive the water through the pipes that's sent to them from all the towns and municipalities on the hillsides. They just have to take that water.
So basically, the trunk sewers, the main receiving sewers. Did you have a question?
Yes, but it's actually a common question. Basically, Pennsylvania has one city that has started where basically what you have done. I know all the particulars are with the URA from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. And they have a couple of spots similar to what you're proposing here. But the question I wanted to specifically ask is, if you have a major storm like we had, a real nasty one on Washington Boulevard, and actually somebody's died from that heavy storm. I mean, quite sure you guys don't have the size of hills that we have here. And I think sometimes that creates a major rush of water that has to be properly dispersed.
That's a
How do you
trick
deal
question.
with that? How do you deal with that?
Because we do have the same topography that you all.
Really?
Yeah. In Cincinnati, which is another reason for us wanting to pursue source control, and be able to not only manage the volume of the flow, but also the peak of the flow. That if we're allowed to look at the upland areas of these watersheds and put in detention that slows down the flow and meters it through the system, that we don't get this flashy sort of flow
We have a
coming
couple of
down.
them like that over there.
Yep.
The mayor trying to fix that.
Jermaine, to comment about control and ownership of the upstream pipes, what Cincinnati has been doing is not, she hasn't even been talking about the upstream pipes. She's been talking about the land and the routes.
Precisely.
And that, you don't own, with a few exceptions of county property and parks and municipal buildings, you don't own, MSD does not own the places that people are putting rain gardens. MSD is subsidizing them to put in rain gardens and green roofs and all these things in a way that Alcoasand could hear.
Yep.
And something that Alcoasand hasn't done and MSD hasn't yet done either, of offering incentives. I mean, sewer rates should, if there were enough people going around measuring, sewer rates should depend on how much impermeable surfaces you have on your property that go in. And so if you build a rain garden, it subtracts. If you have a green roof, it subtracts a portion. And if you have your driveway be permeable pavement, that would subtract. So she hasn't even talked about the upstream pipes, the upstream municipalities. It's the control of what you're doing on the land
It's a total
that is
different
being
environment
so
here.
creative.
It's a totally different environment than up there. We have more hills, like you
She
said.
says that's already.
It's pretty hilly in Cincinnati. Okay, let me, I know we focused a lot on sort of these near source, smaller control type projects, but I want to just show you a couple of our watershed level solutions, and I think that may kind of give you some perspective here. So anyway, I talked about economic conditions, declining funds, declining population, etc. And I'm just going to skip here to our Lick Run watershed. And this watershed actually is a great example of sort of the topography issue, if you will. You can't really see it on here, unfortunately, but the main spine through here is a valley, and then everything else is steep hills draining to that valley. So the red line work there is our current combined sewer infrastructure system right now. With those hillsides, most of it is undeveloped, sort of open space, hillsides, if you will, not really developable, and at times prone to slippage, prone to landslides. And so we deal with those types of issues as well as we're looking at our watershed. So I'm going to walk you through sort of a watershed solution that we're going to implement if the EPA gives us the green light as part of the alternative to the default solution. So again, CSO5 is our largest discharging CSO. And most of that, if you look at the composition, if you will, of that flow, most of it's stormwater. And so it's a no-brainer to try to look at pulling out that stormwater. So what we did is we looked at what we call strategic separation. And first was looking at those natural hillsides. And how can we capture the natural runoff from those hillsides? How can we slow down the flow and create a separate stormwater conveyance that pulls the flow out of our combined system and allows it to be directly conveyed to the Mill Creek, which is at the outfall. And so we were able to look at cost effectively doing that for a large portion of the watershed. And it allowed us to, again, minimally invest in infrastructure. Now, as part of looking at this, again, the conditions of the watershed are so important, was an opportunity to work with the communities in this watershed to develop a master plan and to look at what they wanted their community to look like. And we were able to partner and work with them to develop a concept that allowed us to convey the stormwater. Basically, this represents foreclosed property. Some represents your brownfields property for redevelopment of that community around that conveyance system. And we were able to look at a surface conveyance system as a result of that.
A stream or a creek, perhaps?
Yeah, right. We're basically calling it a valley conveyance system, right? And a lot of folks call it, sort of reestablishing the historic river or creek that was through there. But in essence, it's a way for us, again, to convey the stormwater, but also to treat it along the way. And so this represents that valley area that I was talking about. So once you've pulled off that natural runoff from the hillsides, you now convey it through this valley conveyance system is what we're calling it. And we're making sure to include stormwater best management practices, green infrastructure assets that allow us to treat the water, if you will, before it discharges into Mill Creek. So basically, I know there was a question that you had asked about what our strategic separation and scope of that look like. So these orange lines represent the hillside systems that allow us to pull off that natural runoff. It also allows us to strategically use existing topography where we have natural depressions already to detain and slow down that water. And allows us to basically control the flow down through the valley and then out towards Mill Creek. So we've got strategic separation, so separate storm sewer network. We've also got best management practices between the detention basins. Some of them will be bioinfiltration basins. Some of them will be engineered wetlands systems as well. And then more structural BMPs to control sediment that may be coming off those hillsides in those upstream areas. And then as part of that, we have an opportunity to work with our city Department of Transportation to look at some transportation changes within the corridor that the community is asking for as a result of all this master planning effort. And so they recently got a grant to look at some transportation changes in that corridor. So we're very excited about just the things that this can be a catalyst for some of these communities. Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about what those transportation changes?
Sure. So right now, I'm trying to find a better picture. I'll just use this for now. But right now, this street is a one-way pier, and then this street's a one-way pier. And this is the west side of Cincinnati, sort of the more older historic side of Cincinnati. And on the east is what we call the Western Hills Viaduct that basically takes you downtown. And so the way that the roads were configured through here, it was really just a vehicular pass-through. I mean, people were just whipping through here, and there was no sort of infrastructure to stop, slow down, maybe pull over and park, that sort of thing. I mean, when you're crossing the streets, it's like run for your life, type of thing. And so part of what we looked at with CDOTE was to change that southern street into a two-way pier, more of a boulevard feature that allowed you, again, to stop, work, and play, if you will, and start to look at those principles around how do you make this community more than just a pass-through. And that was in direct response to what the community wanted through here. So they got a grant to do design and right-of-way acquisition for this, and they're in the planning phase right now.
And how do you connect that to the stormwater?
Well, basically, because this was part of a master planning effort, we could lead with our combined sewer overflow problem. This is what we have to do. And we're going to be spending a lot of money through here. And when we looked at what we can do to manage stormwater, we saw all these other opportunities because we were talking with other partners within the corridor, especially the community that was impacted through here. And so as part of sort of our overall watershed study, we not only identified combined sewer overflow solutions, but also other community enhancement issues as well. So again, it's sort of leveraging the dollars that are going to be spent through here, the timing of other work and other studies going on in these communities, so that we're just in a place where we can get multiple benefits of the timing of all these efforts and all this money that's going to be spent in these communities.
It's wonderful. It's an excellent idea that you guys, the project you had there. And so you went to these communities, you've seen where they had the problems of overflow water coming down there and flooding out their places, where they live, the communities. And you said, we can do this and we can make your communities better by the control of the flow of the water coming down off the mountains, off the hills. It's wonderful.
Because at the end of the day, if we can help, communities here, South Fairmount, Price Hill, communities that have been hit hard by economic times, if we can help them reestablish their business district, help them reestablish their civic and recreation areas, help them establish other parts of their communities, new businesses that have left and are now interested in coming back because there's going to be this stream conveyance. Everyone's talking about waterfront property now. If we can leverage our dollars that we would have spent anyway to get them on their way towards reestablishing their communities, now we've reestablished a community that can support the infrastructure that we're putting in there. I mean, that's what it's about at the end of the day. And we can partner with our communities so that there's multiple benefits.
Responsible for doing this, figure out that this was the best way to go.
Strong local leadership. I mean, I can't say that enough. One was the cost of the consent decree. Again, that sort of led everything. And the fact that we were not in a sustainable position to be able to afford the money that we're going to have to spend to install this infrastructure. We couldn't do double-digit increases, every year. So we had to think differently about what we do. We had to find a cost-competitive solution to it, and we had to find a way to rebuild our communities and rebuild our economy at the same time to support the infrastructure we need to install. So it was, started from the city, the Hamilton County Board of Commissioners, and then MSD itself.
I guess my only real comment on this is the truth of the matter is, though, you folks have been at this for 11 years now. You said it started in 2002, so this isn't something that you've done in a year or two. This is a long, slow slog. I mean,
Correct.
this is,
Correct. No,
Yeah.
that's a very, very good point.
The alternative plan was submitted in '09, and EPA turned it around in 2 years.
Yeah, officially approved it. Officially approved it. Now, as I mentioned, with our alternative study, we've been corresponding very regularly with EPA on that and the development of that. And when we're able to deliver our recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, who in turn delivered it to EPA, we said that, so initially we had said, trying to find that number through here. I think it was $244 million in 2006 dollars. And the county said, if we spend that amount, what benefit are we going to get if we did an alternative strategy through there? And so that's what we did. We looked at keeping that fixed number, but then looking at all the other opportunities that could come if we did something very different from a tunnel. And so that's the remedy that we submitted. It eliminates the tunnel. It eliminates the enhanced high rate treatment facility, and it eliminates all those consolidation sewers, and is founded in source control, stormwater management.
The picture that you just had before, the Woodfront area. Now, did you, in the default plan, were there any structures, was there tunnel going through there as part of the default? And by reshaping that, you were able to deal with that as surface level?
Correct. So the default tunnel actually ran up and down the Mill Creek. And actually the way the alignment was going to work in this region was going to cut right through here in order to install. It was going to be 30 feet in diameter. I can't remember how deep it was going to be. But yes, this solution is, as well as 3 other watershed solutions, provide an equivalent level of control at the same cost than the default tunnel.
So, you said at the same cost. So, the advantages are not necessarily, you talked just before, you said, well, the ratepayers would have to pay for this and would be double-digit increases in order to pay for that. That's still going to happen with this solution. It's just a more human solution.
but look what else you get for your money.
Oh, sure,
Right.
absolutely.
Right, and that's where we had to get to. What are the other benefits that we could derive?
So, I mean, assuming that the Pittsburgh solution is a $6 billion solution, it may very well be that a green solution, which gives lots of other benefits, is still going to cost $6 billion. I mean, that's what your experience would suggest.
That's a good question. Because we had to meet the equivalent level of control. Yes. Yes. It ended up being about that. That's a good question.
We required that the operations and maintenance costs also be the same as the gray solution?
They did not require that they remain the same. We had to produce an operations and maintenance plan, however.
Have you costed that out?
We've preliminary costed it out, yes.
And
Yeah.
do you have any idea how it compares to the gray?
Well, the initial costing was that it was much less than the gray, just from the power and energy standpoint, the pump and treat and that sort of thing. Whereas the bulk of the O&M for the integrated solution was really based on the green infrastructure assets as well, but some of the more traditional linear infrastructure. And some of the assets we put in were, detention features, so those require dredging, every 3 to 5 years, depending on the facility. So that made up the bulk of the O&M costs on the alternative strategy side.
What is the amount of training and job opportunities, and this would be everything from the lowest level rain gardens and setting up the rain barrels
to the engineers and architects that will be involved in the routes and some of the other things, what sort of amount of activity will this create in terms of jobs and training opportunities?
Did you look at my presentation? I didn't talk about West Fork, but that's another watershed that's part of our solution. These are the numbers that we've come up with from a job creation standpoint. And we didn't have to do this for our consent decree, obviously, but because, again, we're invested in the communities that we're working in, we wanted to get an understanding of how many jobs we're going to be creating with our Lower Mill Creek Partial Remedy Alternative Solution. And so we've got nearly 1,000 full-time equivalent construction jobs. We haven't even looked at the design and operation and maintenance side yet. That's our next task, to look at that. But from a construction standpoint, this is what we've estimated these projects will create. And between our, what we call our default solution and this alternative solution, we feel that we increase the likelihood that these jobs are actually local. And the city has gone a couple steps further, and they've created 2 requirements. One is sort of a local hire, sort of, I'll call it preference, if you will. And what they've done is require contractors to not only be local to the city of Cincinnati. This only deals with the city of Cincinnati, not the rest of the MSD service area, but city of Cincinnati in particular allows them to focus on local businesses for one, and then number 2, looking at where their employees live. And so starting to look at this underemployed, unemployed sort of area of these cities is where they're trying to target now. So, we feel that, given the rules that are in place now, given the numbers that we've estimated, we have a much higher likelihood of creating jobs, creating small businesses in order to meet our consent decree requirements. That's a great question.
The universities and community colleges, are they getting involved?
Absolutely. So like with Cincinnati State, for example, they're engaging their students in some of the assets that have been installed on their campus and updating their curriculum around these types of assets. So they've actually got a green infrastructure certificate, I believe, that they're developing out of Cincinnati State.
Go back to that question of the cost, where you said that the green solution ended up being sort of equivalent to the gray solution. But the other things I heard you say, though, like for the example with the churches, a lot of the money that went into that actually came from the church, right? And you paid
differential.
You paid the differential. So, the burden on the ratepayers of that was just on that differential.
Correct. You got it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for that situation.
And you do television commercials, or how did you use the media as part of this?
That's a great question. We really leveraged, obviously our website is so transparent. I mean, everything's up there in terms of what we're doing. We did go on sort of some local community television programs as well. Our director has done a number of those types of interviews, and those are also uploaded on the website. We've actually done a video with Green for All. I have it if you guys want to see it, but those types of things we've done as well to sort of help get the word out about what we're trying to do. We leverage our relationships with organizations like NACWA, for example, to tell our story, if you will, and how it's evolved. And we get a lot of great feedback from that as well.
What about the mayor?
Our mayor is...
He or she on board?
He's very on board. Yeah, he's very on board, and so is the vice mayor as well. Both of them are very interested in revitalizing the communities within Cincinnati and the surrounding areas, and every opportunity they get as well to tell about what we're doing. That's part of the reason why they went after the Community Challenge Grant I mentioned earlier was because, they saw all these pieces falling into place. And actually that grant focuses on land development changes and practices that can allow us to leverage stormwater best management practices as well. So they're very supportive of this approach and see the benefit for the city as a result. That's a good question.
Some of your, I know that this project, it can't be just as perfection as you're telling us. What are some of the negatives? I hear all this good stuff about how good it was for the community and all this stuff. What are some of the negative things that came out of the communities about your projects coming through their land and the churches helping out?
Sure. That's a great question. I mean, not everybody's at the same, awareness level. So that's a great point. And of course, we had, folks within the communities that were more traditional minded, if you will, and just couldn't wrap their heads, if you will, around some of these additional benefits. And that's why we had to develop our Communities of the Future Advisory Committee, because these were people that were leaders in the community and could help us sort of understand the issues in terms of explaining the benefits. And it's really hard. We could sit here and understand the benefits, but really explaining the benefits to someone who's not engaged in this every day is hard. It's challenging. And we did a lot of public meetings for the Lick Run Solution. We actually did 4 community design workshops, and we had to work through all the issues that the community raised. And there were a lot. They were concerned about the disruption to the community during construction. They were concerned about that we would negatively impact existing businesses as we were installing our projects. They were, worried about creating jobs as a result of this. So there were concerns that the communities definitely raised, the ones that obviously were strategic and targeted for us. There were definitely concerns raised, and we had to, that's why it took so long. We had to work through all of these. We couldn't unilaterally do something so transformative, if you will, in their communities without working through those issues. So that's a great point. It wasn't all, we're happy now, but now I know you had a question, yeah.
Are you aware of anyone from Alcosan actually studying your process and alternate solutions in the past couple of years?
Personally, I'm not aware. Yeah, I'm not aware personally.
I'm not planning to go home or
I'll go because I haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, along those lines, I had a similar question. I came in late, so your organization's sort of equivalent to Alcosan.
Yes, yes.
So I'm assuming that there are conferences and professional meetings and stuff where people that are working on this get together at a regional level or a national level or whatever and share what they're doing and learn from each other. So I guess my question would be, could you describe a little about that, like who you've had relationships with around the region and whether Alcosan, or maybe you're not the person in your organization that would go to those meetings, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how much agreement there is among different municipalities in the region, or different areas in the region.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and one of the
everybody's got consent decrees, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
You got a lot of water.
yeah. There's a lot of company in this boat. But we worked with an organization called Orsanco, which is kind of the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky region, if you will, sanitation commission. And so we work closely with them in terms of conveying what we're trying to do. They're one of the what do you call it? One of the folks suing us, if you will, for the consent decree. And so we work closely with them. We told our story at a lot of the industry conferences as well, and the approach and what we're trying to do. I mentioned NACWA, which is the Association of Clean Water Agencies, and we had an opportunity to tell our story there as well, and have received recognition from them for doing so. And I think there's sort of a growing acceptance, I think, of taking a step back and looking a little bit differently at dealing with our combined sewer overflow problems, which is why I would imagine US EPA came out with its integrated planning framework. And there's communities, I think Bernie was was telling me on the way over here, you know, DC is getting ready to sort of take a step back and look at a different approach to its combined sewer overflow problem. So I think there's Columbus, City of Columbus, has recently gotten an agreement from US EPA to do some study and analysis on using green infrastructure as part of their consent decree. So I think, you know, I'm not sure what you call the region, but if we're talking about Ohio Valley, I think a lot of, you know, Louisville, for example, Indianapolis, they've got green infrastructure incorporated into their program. Northern Kentucky as well. So I think from a regional standpoint, I would say that folks are seeing the benefit and finding opportunities to revisit it and look at it. If that answers your question. Yes.
Okay, now this is an interesting thing since it was brought up. Lisa touched on it faintly, but my big question is this. Professionally speaking, how well have you folks estimated your stuff within the lines that are going over? Because Pittsburgh is jam-packed with bureaucratic screw-ups. So this particular project itself originally was quoted for $2 billion, now it's up to $4 billion. So how effective and efficient it is. I mean, the convention center, the two stadiums, they had problems with the total underestimation with the underground that we have here for the old streetcar system that sunk under the ground, except it's going out toward the south fields. But you know, there's a series of plannings that are fallacious, and I was just curious how accurate were you in your bids, because it just astounds me what the immense differences are on the finale on most of the jobs, including the great Frank Lloyd job. That I think it actually cost 9 times over the originally was quoted for, you know, and things like that. I mean, so how could you be that misestimating on any engineering jobs?
Well, okay, so let me tell you a story. Not a story, but to answer your question. So I mentioned that $244 million in 2006 dollars for the default tunnel solutions. That was tunnel, EHRT, consolidated sewers. And that was in 2006 they put that estimate together. And when we started to actually get into detailed planning of that, because again, that was the solution on the book, so we had to advance that solution while we looked at an alternative. And when they were advancing that solution, they started to find sort of local issues, so geotech issues, contaminated site issues. So when we first estimate our consent decree, it's a planning level, high level sort of estimate, and so you get a ballpark. And then when you start doing your detailed planning and engineering, you start to find out site conditions and things that weren't accounted for in your contingencies, for example, because you're at a planning level. And so when we were done, we were at nearly $500 million for the project, as opposed to 244. So it happens. It definitely happens. And for our alternative, we actually went through a really rigorous costing exercise because of that very thing. Because the county wanted to make sure that if we said 244 million, that it was going to be 240. So we did sensitivity analysis and all that. And we got our work also to a 30% design level as well, to help inform that effort. So, okay, I know you had a rating.
Thanks. From what I understand, some of the resistance from the local municipal engineers has to do with the soil that we have here, and that can't handle the percolation rates as well as like Philadelphia. What kind of soil is in your region?
We have the clay soils as well, so we deal with that issue as well. What we had to do in a couple of projects that I did show earlier, the demonstration projects, is we had to use what we call an amended soil mix. And so we had to look at excavating out the existing soil and putting back in soils that were more conducive to infiltration. So we know going in that in some areas we're going to have to do that. That's a great question. That's a very good question.
Could you talk about how you will prove to EPA that the green infrastructure is actually decreasing the overflows at the rivers and improving water quality, and when this will happen?
Mm-hmm. So the question was, what has EPA required us to do to monitor the performance of green infrastructure on the CSOs as well as water quality? And we're doing a couple of things as it relates to that. We've got our monitoring program, our standard monitoring program that we have to do anyway. And we'll continue to monitor as different phases of our solution are installed. We have to take an adaptive approach to ensuring that we meet that 2018 goal of reducing CSOs. The second thing from a water quality standpoint is we already do water quality sampling as a district. And then what we started to initiate is more intense receiving stream sampling throughout these particular watersheds so that we can look at not only just what the final quality is, but some of the indicators within those streams as well to see how those are improving as well. So they're based either on the water quality standard for that particular stream or the TMDL or some other requirement. So that's a great question. Sure. Sure. Absolutely.
The question I have to ask you, after the projects are done in each community that you have done this, do you monitor these communities for the rest of the period of time that you went in and changed the project, put your projects in the communities? Do you monitor them?
So monitor the projects or the communities?
Well, the communities you put the projects in.
So,
like in each community, you help with drain off, with the water flow and stuff like that. Do you still monitor those?
Yeah, we still have to monitor the outcome of those projects. Absolutely.
How long period?
Well, again, our monitoring milestone is at the end of 2018, once everything is constructed. But we're going to be doing monitoring leading up to 2018 as well. Right now, we do monitoring. Event-based monitoring, so every time it rains, we check and see what the volume is and what the quality is. And then we may do other monitoring depending on if there's more focused areas we want to get an understanding of how well our projects are doing. So we're going to do performance as well as volumetric monitoring as well.
Because I was talking about as far as mudslides and things like that.
Yeah, and we work with our city transportation department to monitor those things. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Do you have a TMDL for bacteria?
For the Mill Creek, in this area, I don't believe we do. We have nitrogen, total phosphorus, and sediment. I don't think we do. I'd have to check though. I'm sorry, I'd have to check on that.
Have you had to look at the possible cost or contamination from the Marcellus Shale frac as they go into the rivers that go through Cincinnati?
We have not had to look at that yet. I know some folks sort of are on our environmental law community side is starting to look at that, but we haven't had to look at that yet. That's a great question. We haven't. And who was the fourth one?
It seems to me early on in the presentation you mentioned that what you were presenting was there's still going to be some gray elements in this. So, I mean, this resulted in downsizing the tunnels or completely eliminating them and coming up with other structures. What does the gray side of this still look like after all is said and done?
So the gray side in our alternative solution is the separate storm infrastructure pipe that we're putting in, and any new repurposed combined sewers that we need to put in. But yes, our alternative eliminates the tunnel. Yeah, it eliminates the tunnel.
Just eliminating a gray tunnel with gray pipes. So where's the green to that?
Well, again, when we talk about greening up our solution, we're talking about it from a stormwater management standpoint. When we talk about green infrastructure, you're talking about stormwater management. And so our focus is on source control, controlling the source of the stormwater. And that may include putting in a series of green infrastructure systems. That may include dedicating separate storm pipe in order to convey that separate storm. So there's just a realization that it's got to be an integrated solution in order for it to be effective long term. So that's sort of the approach that we took.
I have one more question.
I think we really need to.
Just the last question, right here, just the last question. Please, just one more time.
Right.
The ratepay of, in fact, your customers, Back in 2005, they paid $10 per thousand, or the annual cost was what, compared to what it is today?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, do you have a feel for it? I mean, you must be a resident there. You must say, oh, listen, 4 years ago I paid $500 a year, now I pay $2,000 a year.
I honestly don't know. I'd have to research that. It's a good question. It's a good question, but I really don't know.
Yeah, I know. They're all great questions. Better answer.
Well, we were supposed to have a Q&A at the end, but we've been having a good discussion all along, so let's give Sharon a round of applause. Doing a tremendous job answering all of the questions that came up and introducing us to some of the great forward-thinking solutions that we could try to adopt here in our region. And if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing here in the region and supporting that, I encourage you to endorse the Clean Rivers Campaign. Check out cleanriverscampaign.org on our website. We have so many things in common with Cincinnati, except the way we're going about solving this problem. So, we have the topography in common. We have similar challenges, jurisdictions, different things like that. We have just so much that we can learn from thinking about a way to benefit our communities and making the sewer infrastructure fix here. Again, it will be the largest public works investment that we've had in Allegheny County in our lifetimes, well, ever. So again, we're looking at how much money we're going to spend and what benefits can we get into our neighborhoods, what kind of jobs can we see, how can we solve our air quality problem along with managing stormwater. We have all of those similar challenges here, and we want to get the most bang for our buck. So if you're interested in being a part of that, I encourage you to become more involved with the Clean Rivers Campaign. Our next Beyond Television series, the save the date is at the back, but Darla Inglis from UC Davis from the Low Impact Development Initiative will be here talking about low impact design, and she used to be the water quality manager for the city of Seattle, so if anyone who wants to come and compare steep slopes and talk about how we can manage that water here, come on over. It's Tuesday, February 12th, and we'll probably be in a new location, but a similar format to this in the evening with a reception and snacks and everything. So I encourage you to come join us for that. And I think Brenda Smith from 9 Mile Run, one of our partner organizations, wanted to make a quick comment before we break.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on one of the questions that came up earlier about cost. Just to clarify that the Alcosan plan that is being submitted, the figure was mentioned of $6 billion, and the plan that's being submitted, there are actually two plans. One is $3.6 billion, and the other is $2 billion. Will they actually end up costing more than that? Probably, but those are the figures of what's actually being submitted here. Also, though, the question of can green cost less? And in the case of New York City, they were originally looking at a $6 billion plan that was all gray, and they ended up deciding to introduce a significant component of green infrastructure, and were able to recognize $1.5 billion of savings by doing that. So you can sometimes find a significant cost savings by including green. And, we've never been advocating as a campaign that we could solve this entire problem through green. We're also looking at an integrated solution. And, to your point, there are different types of gray. So we're looking at, what type of gray makes the most sense for our communities along with the green that we want to see.
So I hope you'll join us next month as we continue to tackle some of the challenges that we see here in Pittsburgh and look for innovative solutions. And we'll also be working in the next few weeks to set up times when we can go also talk with our elected officials as constituents and see where they would like to head in our different municipalities. So if you're interested in that, you'll be on our email list if you sign up with the endorsement form at the back, or if you've signed up. So keep an eye out for those things and different ways you can be involved in the campaign and take action to make the right choice for our region and advocate as ratepayers for what we'd like to see in our communities. So thanks for coming out, and again, let's have a big round of applause for our